for See It Now with Edward R. Murrow, which originates in Studio 41 in New York City. Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America, in cooperation with CBS Television, presents the distinguished reporter and news analyst Edward R. Murrow in See It Now, a document for television, based on the week's news and told through the actual voices and faces that made the news. Edited and produced by Mr. Murrow and Fred W. Friendly. A public service of Aluminum Company of America, the nation's leading producer of aluminum. Now, speaking to you from the actual control room of Studio 41 is the editor of See It Now, Edward R. Murrow.
Good evening. We are 10 years late with this story. But this week, our cameras were permitted to visit what might be called the birthplace of the atomic age. It was a most unusual cradle. The event occurred on December 2nd, 1942. And the cradle was under the stadium at a football field. The rest of our lives will be spent under the combined threat and promise of nuclear energy. Our nation was the first to get the atomic bomb, but it was not an all-American production, as we shall shortly see.
Ed, this is Stagg Field, Ellis Avenue on Chicago's south side.
Although that parapet looks more as if the catapult or the crossbow was invented here, it was here that the atomic age tiptoed in on December 2, 1942. 10 years ago today, to the casual observer, it was an abandoned relic, except for a faculty squash court below the stand. This is where the University of Chicago won Big Ten football championships before they gave up the big time. Here it was that they stopped Red Grange, and 5-yard McCarthy made history. Then, as now, the stands were covered with tar paper, with an occasional weed growing and even a tree. But a careful observer might have noticed air-conditioned ducts sticking up where the choice seats used to be. This air was sucked in, cooled, and blown down through ducts several floors below to the old squash court. We entered by way of the same elevator that used to carry the uranium and graphite down to the first pile. Some of the balconies are now gone, but insofar as was possible, we asked all of the original team that could be assembled to stand where they stood 10 years ago. At the time of the original experiment, Herbert Anderson was 28. He is now one of the top physicists in the country. Next, Walter Zinn, head of the Argonne National Laboratory. Samuel K. Allison, one of the key men here 10 years ago, later helped run the experiment at Alamogordo. Leo Szilard, who helped get FDR's interest in the bomb. Leona Marshall, the only woman on the project. Enrico Fermi, Nobel Prize winner. His was the original discovery. Arthur Compton, another Nobel Prize winner.
My name is Herbert Anderson. I came from Columbia University in New York City to build this pile. I was here on December 2nd to see whether the pile worked. The pile, which was constructed in this space behind me, was literally a pile of graphite bricks and uranium. As a matter of fact, we have here a number of the bricks which we used in the construction of that pile, and I thought you might like to see one or two of them. Here's one of those graphite bricks. We pile these up here. Some of these graphite bricks had holes drilled in them in which we put the uranium cylinders, and then other bricks were placed and stacked one on top of the other until we reached a structure that went way up to the ceiling there. It was really an enormous pile of graphite and uranium cylinders, and covered the whole area, which is marked out by this white line. We have a sketch here showing how the pile looked when it was finished. Here are the graphite bricks which were piled up to form this large chain reacting structure. These are the cadmium control rods, which were used to hold the chain reaction in check until we were ready to try it. This structure is an elevator on which the graphite was lifted into position and then transferred to the level at which the graphite bricks were to be stacked.
I'm Arthur Compton. I was, I suppose, the straw boss of this project. It was my task to find a place for the scientists who knew what could be done with an atomic reaction, find a place for them to do their job. We found the place in the laboratory in which you were standing here at the University of Chicago. That was the beginning. From that time on, we had the atomic program going. We went to see some of the people that you will be seeing here today. Enrico Fermi, Wigner, Ernest Lawrence, and many others, Harold Urey. As a result of many discussions of this kind, we formed a report, turned it into Vannevar Bush of the Office of Scientific Research and Development. The report said, yes, you can probably make an atomic bomb, and it'll be terribly destructive. So destructive that the people who get it first may very probably win a victory as a result of it. We are in a race with Germany. The results in terms of years, 3 years and a half, 3 or 4 years. In terms of dollars, something of the order of $1 billion. That's what it was going to cost. It happened that a report of a similar type had come in from the British at about the same time. Vannevar Bush took the reports to the President. And the President came back, you must go ahead. We can't afford to run the chance that the Germans will get there first, for it might mean that they would snatch victory out of defeat. We just can't afford to let them go, and not press this task ourselves. And so on December 6th, the day before Pearl Harbor, a group of us were brought together at Washington and given our assignments. Harold Urey, Ernest Lawrence, E.V. Murphy. They were assigned with the task of separating the uranium isotopes. They turned to me and said, will you see how you can make an atomic bomb after you have the uranium isotopes separated? On December 2nd of 1942, their reviewing committee, set up under the auspices of the Army, came here as the last stage of its investigation to make one more look. They were in my office over here across the campus. And in that office, they asked, where is Fermi? Fermi, you know, the great Italian physicist who had done so much in connection with neutrons. I told them, Fermi asked to be excused today. He's busy over in the laboratory with an experiment. And so I started to answer their questions. We'd been at it for half a day. The telephone rang. They're ready to try the crucial experiment. I knew what they meant. We picked the youngest man of that reviewing committee, happened to be Crawford Greenewalt, now the president of DuPont, but then a young research man who had been heading some of DuPont's important research developments. He and I came across the campus. We came into the room in which I'm now sitting, into a balcony over there, and we saw the pile of graphite and uranium blocks piled here where I'm sitting now. They had tried some preliminary experiments. Now they were set to try the final one. I recall Fermi's instructions to Walter Zinn. Pull out the control rod another foot. On the basis of the early experiments, we knew that now was the showdown. If we were going to have a chain reaction, it would come at this time. And you could hear the counters that recorded the radiation beginning to click. And they clicked faster and faster until they became a rattle. And then you could begin to see the spot on the galvanometer move across the scale. And as it moved faster and faster, it got to the middle of the scale, and Fermi said, throw in the control rods. The control rods went in, and the spot of light moved back toward zero. That was the evidence that a chain reaction, the release of atomic energy, had been affected, controlled, and brought back again to zero. A little chill went up. I remember the grin that was on Fermi's face as he said, "Well, boys, that's that." Somebody pulled out a bottle of Italian wine, and everyone was pleased. But most of all, I remember the expression on the faces of some of these men. There was Enrico's face, Fermi's face, that is, cool and collected. And there's Leo Szilard. He was troubled about the international repercussions, what all that would mean. And then there was Wally Wilson. It was he who had called me on the phone and invited me to come on over here. Wally had turned in a report more than a year before, indicating the possibility of the atomic reaction. But he said, "Please take me off of this. I don't want to have anything to do with something that's so destructive." So we put him on radar. But after Pearl Harbor, he had come around to me and said, "I want to get back and do my part on that atomic task." But best of all, I remember the face of Crawford Greenewalt. His face was aglow. He had seen a miracle. No less than a miracle that was opening the dawn of a new era. And as we walked back across the campus to that reviewing committee, Crawford was telling me what he was thinking of. New sources of power to turn the wheels of industry, new methods for use in science, new possibilities as yet undreamed of. From there on, the story is well known. It's a matter of history. Well, as I come back to this room, it's a good many years since I was in here last. I see here on the floor marked out where that 30-foot pile of black blocks of graphite and uranium were. Brings back a certain nostalgia.
Next, Enrico Fermi. Had he not fled from Mussolini's fascism, the enemy might have had the bomb ahead of us.
My name is Enrico Fermi. I was born in Rome. On December 2nd, 1942, I was directing this show, which means that I could not have done a thing without the help of the rest of the boys and girls. This room looks now very different from what it did 10 years ago. None of this scaffolding was there. The room was somewhat bigger. The ceiling was higher. On that particular day, we all assembled on a balcony that looked somehow like the one that I'm on now. In spite of some similarity between the working of a pile and the working of an atomic bomb, there are few instruments or experiments in physics that move so slowly as did the reaction in that particular machine. This, of course, was desirable and planned. We did not want to have an explosion, nor even a remote possibility of an explosion. Actually, the reaction went on so slowly that people sort of watched the instruments rise barely perceptibly, and only by some amount of calculation could we at the end say that the self-sustaining chain reaction had been achieved. Now there were some precautions being taken. There was a control rod named Zip that was manipulated by Zinn and by Hilbery, that would just be drawn by gravity into the structure if that had become necessary. And after some hours of approaching very carefully the reacting point, we passed the reacting point very barely, just barely, and the reaction began to increase and to increase faster and faster. And if we had allowed it to go on all through the night, eventually it would have reached an extremely high intensity. But of course, after some reasonable time, we dumped in again the control rods, and the intensity suddenly went down.
I am Leona Marshall of the University of Chicago. During the time when the pile was being built, we followed the increasing radioactivity with counters, and from these measurements made an estimate of the expected rise in activity of the pile at startup.
I am Leo Zilad. I was born in Hungary 54 years ago. In 1939, together with Enrico Fermi, I dreamt up a chain reaction system composed of graphite and uranium. On December 2nd, 1942, I was here to see it work. On that day, my only function was to say, "I told you so." I remember when it all was over, and everybody has left except Fermi. I shook hands with Fermi and said, "I believe this will go down as a black day in the history of mankind."
My name is Samuel Allison. I was born in Chicago, right about half a mile from this spot. What did I do on the project? Well, at various times I did various things. At one time I piled graphite. At another time I was in charge of some chemists. And then again I was in charge of some fish experts who were trying to find out if we were going to damage the salmon in the Columbia River. It's too bad Al Graves isn't here. He couldn't get here from Los Alamos. If he were here, he ought to be up there on a platform showing what he did when the chain reaction was started. Up there was a jar of cadmium solution, and that jar was up there at the time the chain reaction was started on December 2nd, 1942. Now, cadmium is just poison to the chain reaction. It puts out the chain reaction like water puts out fire. And we thought that if everything else failed, we could have somebody up there with some cadmium in solution so that the solution could be spilled or poured over the structure and stop the reaction. We're awfully glad that we didn't have to do this because it would have ruined the graphite and the structure for all future use.
I am Walter Zim. I was here in December 1942 when the chain reaction first operated. My job at that time was to coordinate the various groups who were putting together the uranium and graphite which made up the pile.
My name's Tom Brill. I also worked on controls. At the time of the experiment, I was 22. I'm still with the Argonne Laboratory.
After the experiment succeeded, a toast was drunk. The scientists went up to the street level. Most of them never returned to that room until this week. They carried their secret with them. But it was necessary to inform Dr. Conant at Harvard, who would relay the news to Washington. Dr. Compton did it in a most guarded telephone call. Dr. Compton said he was no actor, but he agreed to repeat it for us as a tribute to Fermi.
Dr. Conant, Jim, this is Arthur. I thought you'd want to know that the Italian navigator has just landed in the New World. What's that? Yes. Yes. The natives were friendly. Everyone landed safe and happy. You want to know the next news, we'll get that on to you as soon as we can. Well, that's all today.
Arthur Compton is now president of Washington University in St. Louis. That was his private way of stating what a bronze plaque now tells on the exterior of Stagg Field. On December 2, 1942, man achieved here the first self-sustaining chain reaction and thereby initiated the controlled release of nuclear energy. Fermi and Szilard were only two of many foreigners who contributed to this project. American science is not omniscient, nor is it self-sufficient. Power is never absolute. It depends upon progress, and traditionally, American scientists have welcomed the initiative, the brains, the experience of their foreign colleagues. Today, under what is called the McCarran Immigration Act, it is quite possible that neither Fermi nor Szilard would be permitted to enter this country. Scores of scientists have been refused permission to come here, scores of non-communist scientists. This is not in the American tradition. There is a little-known quotation from a man called Adolf Hitler, who once said, "The great strength of a totalitarian state is that it will force those who fear it to imitate it." Time now for Alcoa.
I've got the waybill here. This GATX 8000 is hot and has to go on number 93.
The GATX 8000, built in 1928, was the first aluminum tank car that was ever built. Today, 23 years and more than 1,500 aluminum tank cars later, the Alcoa-developed GATX 8000 is still in operation, still able to carry industrial chemicals from one end of the country to the other. Why did Alcoa pioneer the aluminum tank car? In tank cars properly constructed with the right Alcoa aluminum alloy, shipments of highly reactive chemicals are not affected by the aluminum. The aluminum is not corroded by the chemicals. More, the aluminum tank car has proved itself able to withstand the hard knocks of day in and day out freight traffic. In 1928, when Alcoa developed its first car, 16 aluminum plates had to be used to form the shell. Too many plates for fast tank car construction. This presented a need for wider aluminum plate than had ever been made. The answer was found through constant research, and finally the building of Alcoa's new Davenport, Iowa aluminum rolling mill, capable of rolling the widest aluminum plates in the world. Plates large enough so that it takes only 3 of them welded together to form a tank car shell. Today, aluminum tank cars are being built in this Sharon, Pennsylvania plant of General American Transportation Corporation and at other tank car plants. The aluminum tank car is one more example of how Alcoa, since 1888, has continued to meet its responsibilities as the first and leading producer of a vital metal. Aluminum by Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America.
Another election is being held today, this time in the Saar, that little strip of territory that divides France and Germany. This will not determine the future of the Saar, merely select a parliament. Both France and Germany have said that they want the unity of Western Europe, but they cannot agree on the disposition of this small territory that divides the two countries. The pro-German parties have been outlawed. The final result of this will not determine the future of the Saar, but it may well determine the prospects for the future unity of Western Europe.
Hello, Ed Murrow. We are in Saarbrücken, the capital of the Saar, this little speck on the map between Germany and France. It is smaller than Rhode Island, has a population only slightly larger than Pittsburgh, but it's a big problem because it could poison all of Western Europe. The Saar would be nothing more than an obscure corner of Germany if it were not sitting on 10 billion tons of high-grade coal.
16 million tons of coal are mined here every year, and coal has brought steel to the Saar, 7% of the total output of all the Schumann Plan countries. France runs both the coal mines and the steel mills, and the Saar itself, once part of Germany, has been since World War II tied to the French economy. The frontier with Germany is complicated and clogged with red tape. The French border is open. The Saar flag is an adaptation of the French tricolor. France runs all the bank and controls the credit. The French franc is the legal currency. The French ambassador, who is virtually an appointed governor, answered a few questions for reporter Hottelet.
Mr. Ambassador, what are France's interests in the Saar?
France needs this economic union not for selfish reasons, but in order to continue its efforts toward European unity. If Germany is as reasonable of France, the Saar problem need not stand in the way of a united Europe.
The French claim that without the Saar, they cannot meet their defense agreements with NATO. But in Bonn, Under-Secretary Walter Hallstein of the West German government has another view.
We consider the Saar German territory until a treaty concluded with Germany decides otherwise. The people of the Saar must be heard in this question too, and their voice must be raised in full freedom.
The German language still persists here. Newspapers, radio, marriage ceremonies, and politics are still in German. We asked Prime Minister Hoffmann how he feels.
Die Verfassung des Saarlandes von 1947 basiert
We want political autonomy, but an economic union with France.
der saarländischen Autonomie.
But there is opposition to this union. This is Social Democrat Kurt Conrad.
Die Saar ist politisch nicht frei. Die Parteien müssen von der Regierung...
We are not permitted to oppose the union with France. If the next election were free, the Tsar would remain German.
Gegen den wirtschaftlichen Anschluss an Frankreich ist verboten.
The unions in the Tsar criticize the lack of economic freedom, resent the fact that their wages are fixed in Paris, and resent their French bosses. But there is no violent anti-French sentiment.
My name is Hermann Trittelwitz. I administer a county of 65,000 people right on the French boundary. We are all Germans and want to return to Germany, but we know and respect our French neighbors. We are not nationalists because 2 wars have shown us that nationalism does not pay. We want best that there were no frontiers to everyone.
Correspondent Hotelet put it this way.
In France and Germany, too, there are men who are willing to meet each other halfway and pool their resources, as in the Schuman plan. But there are those who think of Europe in relation to their own narrow national interests, who see power and security in 19th century terms of blast furnaces and boundaries. If these men gain the upper hand, they can kill understanding between Germany and France, and thereby wreck present hopes of a common defense and a common solution of European problems. The Tsar is an open wound. A cure cannot be postponed, and it cannot be faked by either side without disastrous consequences.
Dick Hotelet is in Saarbrücken today, and he cabled me just a few minutes ago saying the votes are still being counted, that there was a protest of about 20 to 30% of voters, but whatever happens, the Saar will remain a live issue between France and Germany. We have been working under the sponsorship of Alcoa for a year. It has been a very agreeable relationship. At no time have they suggested to us what we should do or how to do it. So any failures or shortcomings are ours and not theirs. We have been informed that they have determined to continue this relationship into the future, a decision which gives us considerable pleasure and which we hope from time to time may even give you a little pleasure. Good night and good luck.
This is aluminum. Nature made it light. Alcoa made it strong, plentiful, and low in price. This is aluminum. The wherever college-educated coffee maker makes delicious coffee every time. Wherever, first in America's kitchens. This, too, is aluminum, a better kind of cable for the transmission of electric power. Alcoa's ACSR, aluminum cable steel reinforced. For more than 60 years, aluminum cable has meant the delivery of high-voltage electricity with the advantages of lightness and strength, economy and dependability. Alcoa aluminum cable means fewer towers, longer spans, less costly erection, a minimum of maintenance. There will be more and more Alcoa aluminum cable steel reinforced when our country's defense needs have been met. Aluminum from the ever-expanding facilities of America's foremost producer, Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America.
This is the CBS television network.